Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Andrew Harvey, and I am the Chief Executive of VMA Group. And I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to host the next episode of our Meet the Author series, and delighted to be here with the amazing Amanda Coleman. Amanda, thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon. It's great to have you with us. Amanda has written not just one book, actually, but Amanda's written 3 books over the years. So do go and look out for them all. But today, we will be particularly talking about her latest book, which is on the topic of reputation management, which I'm sure for many people listening, for many organizations and the comms people that support them, it's never been more important. So a massive thank you to Amanda for joining us today. I'm going to ask Amanda to introduce herself in a second, because she will probably be able to do a much better job of it than I could. So we'll get to that in a second. And what I'm going to do is just talk relatively slowly for the next 60 seconds, just to give everyone a chance to join the call this afternoon. As I say, we had lots of people sign up, so I'm sure we've got a lot of people joining right now, but over the next 60 seconds, we'll have a few more. So just as a bit of a preamble into the conversation, I'm sure many of you will know VMA Group, actually. Some of you may have been to our Meet the Author conversations in the past as well. For those that haven't, VMA Group is an international talent consultancy and recruitment business, and we've spent the last 40 odd years recruiting into the comms industry all around the world, actually. But when we're not busy recruiting, we run all sorts of events, and we run things like we do today with the Meet the Author webinar. And the reason for that is that I've worked in comms recruitment for 20 years now, and I'm a massive advocate for continued professional development. And I think there's a strong link between those people that do well in their career, those people that can best support the organizations that they work for, based on the fact that they are continuing to learn over a sustained period of time. And I think that's the best way to stay ahead of any changing world that we live in. So that's why we run these webinars. And we really hope that you'll find it interesting today and that you'll take some stuff away that you might be able to employ within your own organizations. So, as I say, lots to cover from Amanda's book. You can buy Amanda's book from all good bookshops, as I'm sure she will reconfirm, but you can also order it from the comfort of your own home on Amazon as well. There you go. So you don't even need to leave the house. You can buy a book from the comfort of your own home. But we will also be recording this webinar today, so you'll be able to access it again at your own leisure on our website or through our YouTube channel as well, and you'll also be able to share the link with friends too that weren't able to make it. Please do ask as many questions as you want. I know Amanda's really happy to answer any questions, so please do put them in the box at the bottom. You know how it works, I'm sure, and we will do our best to answer those questions at the end, unless we get something really timely during the conversation, in which I might pull out a question there as well. Obviously, we're not going to get a chance to cover everything that's in the book this afternoon, so I have pulled out a few questions that I think will be of interest to those people listening today. But before we get stuck into those, Amanda, I think we've probably now got everyone joined and comfortable. So, Amanda, over to you to introduce yourself a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. No, and it's good to be here. I'm saying it's well, it's such a big subject, and reputation, as it, I'm going to say before I get into reputation's got a bad reputation. Even mentioning it, I used to work with somebody. I was in the police for 21 years. That's part of my background. And one of the senior police officer who refused to let you say the word reputation, which is quite challenging when you're dealing with that. But anyway, I can cover that at some point. So yeah, I started my working life as a journalist before moving into public relations. I worked for a couple of organisations, ended up joining the police, doing communication, and spent 21 years in police communications. Did worked at 2 different police forces. Was the head of comms in Manchester when the arena attack happened. So I spend most of my time since I've left the police, the last 6 years, just doing crisis communication work, and in all its forms. So the previous books I've written, Crisis Communication Strategies, does what it says on the tin, I suppose. And the other one that followed that was I call it the prequel, which was about issues management to try and avoid a crisis, which is called Everyday Communication Strategies. And then the trilogy ends at the minute with strategic reputation management. So that's my background. I do lots of work in emergency planning, society work, and various other things like that. But reputation is an interest of mine, and I think when I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I think I was asked actually by the publishers would I write a book on reputation management, and before I agreed to, had a look at everything that was out there from over the last however many years, um, and decided I would, but I wanted to take a slightly different approach to it. So it's not just kind of business reputation, which a lot of the previous books have been written about, but a slightly more broader kind of view of it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you again for chatting to us this afternoon. I was going to ask you, actually, one of the first questions I was going to ask you is why did you decide to write the book? And obviously, you've mentioned there that the publishers encouraged you to do it. But I wondered whether, in
Mm.
terms of the timing of it, because you could have written this book, over the last few years. Do you think there was a particular timing element to it that made it more relevant now than it would have been 5 years ago, say, for example?
Yeah, I think so much has happened that challenges us. So social media, the rise of artificial intelligence, and kind of how that plays out, things like deep fakes, things like non-events, and having your the view of your business totally changed because of some, generate AI generated imagery or whatever. All those things we, even 2 years ago would have been unlikely to be concerning us, whereas now those are everyday events. Those are things we can thinking about all the time. So what does it matter? Yeah, for me, I think, the perception has always been important, hasn't it? It's always been kind of, from a PR perspective, that's what we work, it's, people's perception, but the ability for other people to manipulate that perception, and do it with misinformation, do it with disinformation, do it in lots of different ways, I think means we need to be even more aware of reputation, unlike my one of my previous bosses who was aware of it, but you just weren't allowed to mention it. I think we've got to be more aware of reputation. So it's not just a communications kind of PR function, it's a business function. And everybody in the business needs to be bothered and understand it. So I think that's
Yeah.
why I suppose it felt like the right time. And I also think some of the books that have been written were great, but they don't necessarily take account of they were written, 10 years ago. There's
Yeah.
still lots of really good stuff in them, and I reference some of it in the book, but not necessarily where we are and where we're going to potentially over the next few years.
Yeah. And I would agree. I think talking to people that we talk to, your reputation management, obviously, it's been something we've talked about for a long time, but it seems more important than ever these days. And we were joking, weren't we, just before? Not joking, but having a bit of a conversation around what's going on in the world of politics at the moment, and the whole stuff that if you turn on the TV, you're going to hear all about it. That in many ways is a big kind of reputation management piece for the political parties to deal with there. So yeah, very
Mm.
interesting and timely. So let's ask you some questions. So you're an expert. You're the expert in the room. So the first question I wanted to ask you was quite maybe a simple one, or maybe a slightly difficult one in some ways. In the world of comms, often there are all of these different phrases that are used, and sometimes they mean different things to different people. And actually, when we talk about reputation
Mm.
management, I'm interested to know from your perspective, what does that actually mean, and how does it differ from general corporate communications or even crisis
Mm.
communications? Because some people might say, well, corporate comms is reputation management, but then strategic reputation management to you might be something different. How would you define
Yeah.
reputation management?
It's interesting because again, there's a whole kind of chapter devoted to it. So I'll try and kind of bring it to some kind of key points. But I think part of it is we need to redefine what we mean by reputation and reputation management. And interestingly, the Grunnig fans, amongst anybody listening, there's a really interesting kind of paper where it's like you can't call it management, it's influence, because we can't manage people's reputation, we can influence it. And I think there is a real kind of need to understand that I get quite frustrated when an organization may be having a difficult time and they
Mm,
go, well, just put some good stories out, i.e., comms can make that reputation better. But if fundamentally your business isn't operating in the way it should do, if you make bad decisions, if it operates unethically, if your financials are all over the place, it doesn't matter how many good stories you put out, you're not going to impact on the reputation. So I think when you start to try and define reputation, it's about your vision, your purpose as a business, how you are living that, how you are bringing that into what you do and what you say you do. So the kind of what you actually physically do, and obviously what the comms explains that you do. But also then, how does it sit within the societal norms? And how does that work? So, because there's a lot of polarization in society, there's a lot of focus on ethics and ethical behavior. So you've got a number of elements to think about. So I also think, and I use this sometimes when I'm training. Does anybody working in comms actually really understand what the reputation is of their organization or the business that they're working with or in?
Right.
And you would probably say no, unless you're going to have massive amounts of resource into reputation tracking. You're not going to know that, but because you've got multiple kind of audiences. There's
Mm.
multiple elements. It's reputation amongst stakeholders, reputation amongst customers or service users, reputation within your staff. So I think we have to take a kind of different look at it. Stop worrying about the one metric that we want to kind of work towards, and look at those different elements and probably weight it. Because for some businesses, the views of stakeholders, investors being another one, are going to be more important potentially than other aspects. So are we able to focus on what matters? But fundamentally, for me, it's like it's like broad across the DNA of the
Yeah.
organization. It's about what you do. It's about the staff and how they feel. It's about your governance arrangements. It's about the finances, about how you operate, and yeah, it's about comms. So I think this is the kind of focus for me a lot is we need to be advocating and driving some of this, but we don't own it. We
Mm.
can't own it, and if we own it, then you end up in that world of just put out some good messages, or you know,
Yeah.
um, comms being sort of the kind of we'll fluff it, we'll shine it up and
Yeah.
make it look. If it's fundamentally not good, that's the issue you need to be focusing on. So
Yeah.
what I've tried to do in the book is bring those elements in around how the business needs to take control of understand reputation and it not just be a comms thing.
Yeah. And can I ask that? And that is really interesting. Can I ask about the timing again on it? Is it so? It's become like this very critical comms challenge. It seems so more than ever. Is that because of, let's say, the way social media has changed the world? Is it because this perceived lack of trust that people have in businesses these days, organisations, or leadership? What is? Why is it? Why has it become so much more important to think about this stuff now? Why are we talking about it more now than we might have done a few
Hmm.
years ago? Do you think?
Yeah, I think we've always talked about it. So, you go back into history, how we view people, how we view organizations. We've always made judgments and assessments, haven't we, on either the
Yeah.
personal experiences we've had or, somebody else who worked with them, so then, or received some kind of product. So we've always kind of absorbed all those things. I think the difference we've got now is we're so hyper connected.
Yeah.
So things that we normally wouldn't necessarily have been that interested in or would have been connected to, we're bombarded with it all the
Mm.
time. So how you it's not just how you present yourself. I also think, with the kind of increase in the use of AI and stuff, if you are just presenting a good front, um, and the actual behind the scenes is not good, that will get played out. We can see it,
Yeah.
people know that with sites that staff go on and go, don't work here, it's horrible,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have had that a few years ago. So I think, whereas
Yeah.
perhaps in the past you could have painted a veneer and there wouldn't have been the deep kind of look into how you operate. Now, with the use of AI, you can ask a few questions, you can call some information,
Yeah.
and you can expose, um, you know, the uh bad behavior, the kind of, the lack of integrity. We're saying one thing, but we're doing a completely different thing. You've got
Yeah.
whistleblowers. So that for me is why things have changed. I think reputation has always been important. I just
Yeah.
think the world has changed in such a way that if you're looking at it positively, it empowers people to call out bad behavior,
Yeah.
but it also allows lots of people to make your life really difficult, even though they may be basing it on no information at all.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that based on conversations I've had with other senior comms people, I think that is a common shared view of why we're talking about this stuff now.
Mm.
I mean, I think one of the things, I think maybe it's often the case that when people talk about reputation management, they think about it when something goes wrong. And it's like, oh my god, this is going to impact reputation. It's not good. It's a negative thing.
Yeah.
But I suppose there's that question about what can someone do? What can an organisation do to build reputation
Mm.
before a crisis occurs. So that they then
Yeah.
have that reputational strength when something inevitably might go wrong, that they don't take, such a hammering, let's say, when something does go wrong.
Yeah, it's a really important point. There's the halo effect and the Velcro
Right.
effect. It's a really good article by Professor Timothy Coombs, who is like the grandfather of academic crisis comm stuff, where he talks about the halo effect, where you build that reputation, everything you do, and it's not just what you say you do, but you do good service, you look after people, your products are good, you make changes, you deal with issues quickly, you respond to complaints quickly and efficiently and make sure that people get kind of resolution. So you do all those things so that when something happens, in most cases, there's a bit of, okay, benefit of the doubt. They're usually quite a good organization. That's where your positive reputation really sort of helps and supports you. If it's a huge thing and you're massively culpable, the impact of that halo effect is going to be quite minor, but it's still kind of there. You flip that, you can get the Velcro effect, and we'll all know organizations where they had something go wrong, they perhaps haven't managed it quite as well as they should, and then everything, even in that industry that gets kind of that people are talking about, they automatically kind of sticks to them. A minor issue and it'll suddenly stick to them. So you've got those two things at play a lot of the time. So I think, understanding the halo effect, I would say this, I'm a comms person at heart, still am. I think we've got to invest in comms. Not because we are going to do all the reputation building, but because we can then enact some of the things that an organization needs to do. I mean, it's even things like, so in the book, I go through the things you can do to build like it's always got a toolkit towards the end of how to build that reputation and how to really kind
Mm.
of be in that halo positive place. Not just because people then buy your products or use your service or whatever, but also because then you're building for the future. But some of it means don't keep cutting comms teams, you know?
Right.
Because then you'll wonder why. Oh, we cut from, and I've seen this happening all the time, because times are tough. And how do you evaluate reputation? That's another chapter in the book. How do you evaluate it? It's hard to do unless you're going to invest a lot of money. But there are things you can do, which we kind of go at. But you see teams cut from say, 15 to 6, so halved effectively or a bit less. And then you're expecting them to do all the same things. You're kind of building up. I think we're building up in some respects problems for the future, and then there'll be a big
Yeah.
question of, well, why have we not managed to be on top of this or stop this? Well, you can't if you're really limiting your abilities, which is what that kind of does. I would say that I'm a comms person. I would always say, this is what we need to do. But that said, I think there's lots of things we can do, even down to policies that, say you're working with a business that introduced a new policy. Um, have you stress tested it reputationally? Do we know where the risks are so we can identify where the problems may be and stop them happening before we get to that point? So there are lots of real tangibles across the business that people can own that's not comms, that will then obviously put us in that better position of building a better reputation. And some of it is culture. Some of it is, it's got to be the leadership. It's got to be the culture. It's got to be, having really clear purpose,
Mm.
and kind of vision of what you're about that everybody buys into and understands. And all those things which, are about effective running of a business that, kind of adds to the ability to have a positive reputation.
Yeah, I mean, already just listening to you talk, yeah, it's clearly such a huge subject. There's lots of things that one would want to look at to try and master this. I think about some of the people that might be listening to this conversation and some of the people we speak to are often changing jobs or being promoted. So let's say you're a new comms director, you've just joined a brand new organization, or let's say you're a comms manager, you've been promoted into that head of comms role, and you're kind of thinking about this stuff. Maybe you work in a particular industry, and I just wanted to ask a question, I suppose, about given everything you talked about, what if someone's new into an organisation? What are those kind of early warning signs they need to look for that they might think, well, hang on a minute, this organisation is overlooking risk issues here. There might be an issue coming down the road. What are these kind of early warning signs that things might not be as good as they need to be from a reputation management perspective?
Yeah, there's big things and then there's small things.
Right.
So, where does comms sit in the organization is often a really important one. Are you 3 layers away from the decision making? Is it really difficult to be in the room? Are you listened to? Because if you're kind of kept away from some of that detail of how the business is running, then that's an alarm bell for me to start
Mm.
with. Then I think you've got to look at really understanding. If you're new into an organization, one of the things I always want to understand is what do you think your reputation is? Um, what are you basing that on? What information have you got from customers, from service users, from staff? What's the data? What's the kind of insight that you've gathered? And ultimately, and I think, yes, some of this involves time, and I often say I live in a world of fairies and unicorns where everybody's got enough time to do all these things. And I get that you're not, but in the early days of joining an organization, you perhaps got a little bit of a window of people not asking you for everything all at once. But listening to the people who are, the frontline staff, what do they feel? What are the things that they say? How are they talking about the organization? As well as kind of what are people saying externally about the organization? So those, if you haven't got the data and metrics, not many
Mm.
organizations can afford some of the kind of expensive reputation tracking. There's lots of things you can do in terms of being open to and listening. But I think ultimately, it's a culture element in terms of an organization you go into. Um, Culturally, are they set up so that they are questioning what they do? They are open to challenge. I once got told, I shouldn't say this. I once got told that I need to challenge, but in the right way. So I'm not quite sure what the way was. I was challenging, but the challenge wasn't accepted. But that it's those sorts of things which I think are a real sort of what often to be seen as sort of softer elements, but give you a very quick insight into how an organization's going to react. So is it going to react to a crisis in a that it's caused, that it's got responsibility for, with a let's try and hide this, or let's
Right.
try and manipulate so this doesn't get to, or is it going to go, we need to grasp this, take control of this, show what we're doing, own it, and move people. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
that I think is that sort of more cultural element of how an organization functions and what the leadership is like
Yeah.
because a lot of it comes down to leaders as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and that makes sense. And I think talk about measurement there, which is quite interesting. We've had a few other meet the author conversations around measurement recently, and the importance of that. And obviously, that what you're saying here, you can measure reputation, and that's relevant. And the other thing, I love my little sayings, and one that springs into mind is prevention is better than cure, right? So if you can
Mm.
be proactive in the first instance, then less issues down the road. But the one question I did want to build on this and ask you is that you are the expert in the room, and there are probably many people who've worked in organisations where a crisis hits, and everyone's got a view on what should happen next. Everyone, the CEO, the legal counsel. In your experience, though, tell us, everyone listening, when a crisis breaks, and you are the expert, what should people do within the first 24, 48 hours? What must the comms
Oh,
team
wow.
perhaps do within that first 24, 48 hours?
How long have you got? I could talk for hours.
Give
I
us
mean,
the top two or
yeah,
three things.
the top thing is one, recognize it's there. I mean, it sounds like a really stupid thing to say, but again, it's not just is it there? Has comms been told? If you're not like the second or third phone call when something's happened, then you're already on the back foot. You're already, have got further to kind of climb to try and get your kind of messages out there. So for me, it's always that recognizing you've got a problem, and dealing with it early, and getting and being ready to. So preparedness is essential for a lot of this. I would say that I work in crisis
Mhm.
comms. I tell people all the time, have you got a plan? Not because you're going to religiously go through and follow every bit of it, because you won't, but it will give you a framework to then worry about the smaller things about the incident or the situation that you're dealing with. I think the other thing then for me is understanding the detail of what's happened in as much kind of forensic kind of information as you possibly can. So really getting into understanding. Again, that can be really challenging for a lot of comms people who the organization say, well, you only need to know this bit. Well, actually, you don't.
Mm.
You need to know a lot because you've got to start thinking about implications, consequences. What are the knock-on effects of this? Is it going to stop production? Is it going to mean that we're going to, there's a whole range of things that you'll need to be thinking about because often the communications we need to do in the aftermath of a crisis doesn't focus on the crisis, but focuses on all the other things that the crisis has then caused and all those other kind of consequences. So really understanding the detail and getting into that. And then for me, you've got to start considering the scenarios. So assuming that we are getting information out quickly and we are acknowledging and we're kind of doing those things, then you've got to start, where might this go? What might the issues be? How is this likely to develop? Who's affected? What's the impact going to be? And the real challenge in terms of reputation is because we don't measure every day. Nobody, I'm sure,
Yeah.
I would love to meet an organization that goes, yes, every day we measure our reputation. You will never, if you don't have a line in the sand of some description of this is what we feel our reputation is, then how can you know whether it's had a detrimental impact? Because you've
Yeah.
no baseline for then going out after a situation has kind of come full circle and you perhaps have gone through it and got out the other side to go, actually, this has had an impact, The politicians in the UK like to talk cut through, don't they? Has it cut through? Is this
Yeah.
in people's mindsets? Or actually, are we worrying about it, but it's not really affected where we're positioned, or it's not affected where we're positioned with our key kind of groups that we're concerned about. So that's one of the big challenges with a lot of the sort of understanding the impact around a crisis, but looking at the scenarios, and then I suppose because of a lot of my background is who is the audience that you're speaking to, who's most affected, how are they affected, what does that mean, and in the world we're in now, it's not just I'm going to give the facts of dealing with a situation, it's the emotion. People you can't put out factual statements in an emotional situation and hope that it's going to get the result that you want. So I think those are always the kind of key for me. And I suppose after sort of 24 hours, um, you would have hopefully prepared organization would have had a plan of sorts. You used the framework of that, but then you would have something bespoke, understanding the real detail of what you're experiencing and seeing those scenarios, those consequences, and how that might play out. But you're not going to be able to do that in the first 6 to 12 hours if something really busy. So, rely on the framework that you've put in place.
Yeah. And actually, interesting, some of the things you talk about there. So, often when I speak to lots of comms directors, let's say they've gone through a challenge, they will say, oh, yeah, I had a plan. I wanted to communicate more. I wanted to do this. I wanted to be really transparent.
Mm.
But the head of legal told me I couldn't because it was a bit risky without being very specific. Without slandering the sort of the legal profession, overly cautious head of legal who said, no, you can't possibly tell all those people. Why would we? Because, have you, and that's, I hear
Yeah.
that a lot. Have you got any particular tips to how you might talk down a head of legal over them being overly cautious?
Yeah, and I did a short. I do some short 10-minute chats, and I did one with a lawyer based not far from me, and he was a breath of fresh air because he was actually, we the legal profession where they get it need to be challenging ones that don't get it as well around kind of what they're doing. Um, I, I kind of, your stop you saying key phrases. One of my key phrases is, lawyers go in with case law and we can go in with case studies. And I think we
Right.
we we lack, I think, some of the case law sort of approach that lawyers have. Well, in this is, this is why we're saying this. We sometimes neglect to have the backup of why we're suggesting this needs to be said or we need to do
Mm.
those things. And that for me is where I put, the case study situation. I always in my books try and put lots of case studies in, because I think if nothing else, it hopefully is then a bank of. Well, I remember the reason I'm saying we need to say X, Y, and Z is because when this happened, they did got a good result, or so we've got some kind of back up to what we're sort of saying. I think the other key thing, and again, you would expect me to say this, I suppose, is to walk through the plans with those people. So,
Yeah.
and I do crisis simulations, did one this morning. I do enjoy them, but they're always really important for learning. And when you can involve a lot of kind of senior people, the head of legal, head of HR, you can have those conversations in the downtime. So, so you can get ahead of legal going, okay, well, I understand now. I can see what social media is doing. I can see why you're saying we need to do certain things. So let's find the middle ground. So that it's not just a no. It's like, well, perhaps we need to be a bit cautious about that kind of wording, but do you know what I mean? So I think a lot of this we
Absolutely.
can do ahead of time, but
Yeah.
and and get a good relationship with your legal. That's the other good thing. I used to do that in the police. We had a really good relationship with the head of legal, so that we could have those conversations, and we would disagree on some things. We would present different positions to senior leaders who would then they have to make the decision of do they go with the legal advice, do they go with the comms advice. I didn't win all of them, but I think those are some of the kind of key aspects for me, definitely.
Yeah. And actually, do you know what? It's great advice. I think, I meet a lot of comms people who say they have a battle with their senior, C-suite, and because they've said, oh, they've advised one, well, I think we should do this because I think it's a good idea. But as you
Mm,
say, if you've got a case study to back it up, I think we should do this because of X, Y, Z, and look at what's happened in these other organizations. And the simple point, as you say, just to sit down and talk through stuff with your head of legal beforehand, I think is straightforward, but actually a great thing to do. I suppose I've got a sort of off the cuff question for you.
mm.
If you took based on your experience, if you took 100 organizations, how many of them would have a crisis comms plan? And of that percentage, how many of them would have sat down with the head of legal and had these
Mm.
conversations and war gamed it, just to make people feel better or not that are listening?
Oh, there are statistics around this, and I can't
Right,
remember them, so I'm not gonna. But I would imagine, from what I can remember, something like you've got quite a high percentage. I think often it's like up to 60%
right,
of people saying they've got one. The issue is, have you got one and then gone, thanks very much, I've got a plan, I'm happy, or have you got a plan? And I think in the chat, I think Claire said about stress testing, and you've got to have a plan that one, everybody understands, and two, you've walked through so you can know where the gaps are, where the duplication of effort is, and those kind of difficult conversations about who's doing what, and am I getting the information I need, and is legal going to jump in and try and so you can have all those things kind of ironed out. In terms of how many do that, I would think it's a much smaller
right.
percentage.
Okay.
I am lucky because I see a lot of organizations who do want to do that. So this morning, had the whole kind of main kind of top managers, included legal, and we were looking at a comms plan. It was a
Right.
crisis comms plan. So good conversations, highlighting a number of issues. And the other thing that's kind of an offshoot of that is if we're not careful, we write a crisis comms plan. We know what's in it, but then does the rest of the organization? And have we,
Yeah.
does the chief exec or, whoever's in the kind of C-suite, do they know what their roles and responsibilities are in relation to comms, internal and external, and stakeholders, and so yeah, I wish more people would not just have a plan. Plan's really important
Yeah.
as a starting point, but would at least do some walkthroughs with key people. And the other thing, and again, a bit of a bugbear of mine, so I'll throw it in, is you never know when you're going to experience something. So as part of onboarding, as it's called, induction as it used to be in old money, um, is your crisis comms plan part of that conversation? Because if
Right.
it's not, you could be leaving some poor new kind of member of staff, even like a junior member of staff, suddenly in the middle of everybody else understanding what's going on, and they've going, well, I've never seen a crisis comms plan. So I think that we have to kind of embed it really, just like we did when people used to be working in big offices, which you don't tend to do in organizations now. But you had the fire alarm test, and you would
Mm.
go, and you would know where you go, and you'd go and stand there, and all the rest of it. It's kind of almost we need to have that muscle memory around if something happens, this is the plan, this is my role, this is what I know I need to do. But we need to
Yeah.
start it the moment somebody joins an
Yeah.
organization.
I mean, interesting. You mentioned tests, and I think about so in the office block that we work in our office building, we have a fire alarm test at 9:50 every week on a Thursday, right? And then we do a drill where we have to go outside once every 3 months. If you've developed a crisis comms plan, how often would you take your senior leadership team through it? I'm guessing once a year or something different, or would
Well,
that be feasible? Or
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I think sometimes when you talk about kind of crisis exercises or simulations, people imagine the great big war gaming, lots and lots
Yeah,
of kind of things involved, they're all happening at the same time. And you can do those, and they are incredibly useful. But you can do very simple tabletop walkthroughs. Okay, so
yeah,
if this scenario happened, how would we deal with it? What would you be doing? What would I be doing? What's in the plan? Are we following that? So you can make it much more kind of basic. I think the bottom line in terms of how frequently will be based on your risk level. So how much
right.
risk does the organization carry? If you're in a very risky business, I'm thinking of like chemical, oil and gas, all got a number of sectors, isn't there? Also kind of construction where they have a lot of incidents and industrial accidents and all those other things. If you're carrying a high level of risk in
Mm.
relation to what you do, I would be saying, every quarter should be something, should be a conversation, should be a discussion, or, building up to a potential,
Okay.
large scale exercise.
Yeah,
But the more you can mainstream a lot of this, again, because not everybody's got lots of time, and it's like building the insurance for something that may or may not happen or might not happen for many years. I think it needs to be embedded as part of, a quarterly management meeting where you
yeah.
have an hour that's devoted to kind of look through that. And then
Okay.
obviously, like you say, potentially every year doing at least every year
Yeah.
doing a reasonable size
Okay.
sort of run through.
Brilliant. Well, we've talked about crisis and sort of building reputation. We talked about reputation during a crisis, but I was keen to ask your thoughts on reputation recovery, so to
Mm.
speak. So something, let's say, something's happened. It wasn't great. It has been a real issue. All sorts of people internally and externally are not happy about it. What does a reputation recovery process actually look like? Sort of authentic, genuine. How should organizations go about rebuilding a positive
Yeah.
reputation?
Yeah, and again, you kind of like we were saying before, do you understand what impact it's had? If not, if you've not got any kind of baseline and you're kind of guessing a little bit, because it can be very noisy, but not necessarily impact on the bottom line. So is to try and do some listening to try and understand, has this really had an impact in terms of reputation? But there's I call it the four R's,
Aha.
which I talk about in the book. Because recovery is one of the bits I think we don't talk about enough because we spend a lot of time talking about something has happened, how do you respond to it? But how do you build we don't necessarily talk a lot about recovery. So the first bit is to review. You review what's happened, what worked, what didn't work. Have we got any issues that people were raising that are still kind of there, we've not managed to deal with, some concerns. So you kind of understand where people are and what may have or may not have happened when you were dealing with the response. Then you've got to rebuild. The rebuild bit for me is go back to where were you before this all happened. There'll have been issues you were managing, there'll have been problems you were dealing with, there have been reputational concerns. All those will come back, but potentially they'll come back with an added flavor because of the incident you've been through, because of the challenge that you've been through. So you've kind of got to
Mhm.
have another look at it. So you have to kind of take those into consideration. Resources, because all these things take resources, and often when you get to this point, um, everybody else in the business, potentially apart from the chief exec or the C-suite, is like, well, we're done with it now. We're on to normal business. And at that point, you potentially need additional support. If it's had a massive impact and you're going to have to then really drive to get that confidence and trust back in what you do, that's when you need additional support potentially or additional resource. And we don't often have organizations that are geared up to do that. So effectively, you get to what I call re-establish, and that is after a crisis comms plan should come for serious incidents, a recovery comms plan, where you start to pick up those reputational issues. Sometimes it may be operational aspects in terms of how you operate and what you do, audiences that you perhaps haven't been engaged with that came to light that now you need to kind of build into it. Um, And then ultimately, from that will be some forms of change in how you operate, what you do. And again, that's a communication element in it. So the kind of it goes for me, crisis, recovery, and then change comes as a sort of continuum. And it's building that roadmap. So we've got to start thinking about not just hoping if we do some good comms that it'll all work, but that we'll roadmap it out. And going back to what we said at the start, that includes the business looking at how it may need to change. We need to do this in a different way because that went wrong. We need to make sure we've got better monitoring, we've got better risk management, whatever it is. The business may need to change how it works, how it functions. And I think that is not ours to own, but that's part of our comms roadmap out of where you've been.
Do you ever think it is possible to come out of a crisis with a stronger reputation in some ways? Is there, a phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? Again, our little sayings today. But, is it possible in any way to build back stronger than you were before, even though you're the same
Yeah,
organization, but from a reputation perspective?
absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes back to, are you able to, with sort of humility, go, we need to change some of the things that we did, if that's the case, or we need to make sure we are more ready to respond, or whatever it is. It's that bit of the culture, the learning culture. They're not I know best and I'm going to tell you and that's the way it's going to be, but I we are going to be able to kind of build through this. And you can do that right the way through the crisis effectively. We can't kind of, I think sometimes we want to go, here's everything we know about it, that's that done, rather than almost see it as taking people on a journey so that you
Yeah,
can have that conversation with them. So yeah, definitely you can end up the other side of it in a better position, but you've got to be open to change. You've got to be open to um to critically looking at the processes and systems and the way the business operates, and sometimes making hard decisions.
yeah.
Um, I did at the weekend, if anybody's really really interested, I did do a what can Keir Starmer do in his
Did
speech on
you?
Monday. Um, because one of the challenges I always think is, is it always recoverable when you have had a horrific reputational nightmare?
Right.
And I'm thinking post office in the UK, and everything that's gone on over 20 years with the sub post masters and mistresses who were wrongly convicted. And I always genuinely think there is. It may take a long time, and I think that's a generational thing in terms of the way that's gone on for 20 years
Yeah.
and how people view it. But there is always a way back. But you have to be prepared to go, we got this wrong. We needed to do something different. We
Yeah.
accept that that was not what should have happened. Because, yeah, some people may still want to kind of give you a kick, but that's a much better position to be in, isn't it? And that goes back to the culture of the organization, to be strong enough to do that, and do that well.
Yeah. One of the questions I just wanted to again just ask you a little bit off the cuff really is about the nature of the organization. So we've probably got some people listening who are working. You talk about, post office, so let's say UK only business. You've got some that are like truly international. You talk about cultures earlier and the culture of organizations, and you know, uh, we watch the news and we see issues going on all around the world, different politics, different cultures, that sort of stuff. I mean, does that make the approach that Comseret to takes hugely more complex, or actually is the approach still relatively the same and simple, but you've just got to be more considerate of different audience types? I mean, would you, if you're going in as you do to consult with these different organizations, one is usually global, one's not, where would you sort of start in terms of treating them differently, if at all?
One of the key kind of elements of business strength for me in terms of reputation is cultural intelligence. So
Right.
that is, for me, part of your strong reputation. So it doesn't matter whether you're a small business or a large business, it can mean slightly different things. But that is not just that you recognize differences and that, the different kind of cultures or different kind of backgrounds and experiences, but you build it into what you do. So you actively make changes. So you actively recognize what that might mean. So yeah, so for me, you kind of, to a certain extent, large or small, in a multinational or whatever, it's a similar thing. On a small business, you've got to think about it in terms of the people who buy your products, who you serve, who are around you. I worked obviously in police forces. You've got a geographic area, but you really need to understand the makeup of that, what that means, and then you build that into how you communicate on a day-to-day basis, and how you then build that into a communication when you're under pressure as well. And that's the same. Well, I've worked, in different parts with different parts of the world, very similar things we're talking about. But you bring in that cultural intelligence piece.
Mm.
So it will be changes, but a lot of the kind of, I suppose, the framework, the kind of skeleton of it is very similar. But it's a fundamental part for me, increasingly, and externally and internally. So, are you culturally intelligent with your workforce as well? That's an absolute kind of must.
Yeah. Again, I think one of the great things about your book is that it's got actually lots of different frameworks and checklists and stuff in there. And I love a framework or a checklist, because actually when you're talking about all of these different types of organizations and where they're at and the kind of reputation journey and stuff, it can be quite difficult to know where to start. But actually, if you've got a checklist and a framework to go through, it massively helps. Just in terms of the checklists and frameworks that you've got in there, I mean, how would you recommend that people start using a framework or a checklist if it's not what their culture is used to doing, particularly, let's say, reputation recovery, or a different
Mm.
part of that reputation process? I mean, maybe hopefully people go and buy your book, but to see these
Yeah.
frameworks, but just gives a bit of a flavor of the use of a framework.
I think the key for me is to use it as a where are we against this? So if that's the framework I'm looking at, that I think we would aspire to, or we would like to get to, or that's got benefits for us, where do we stand against that? Where are we good? Where are we not so good? Because every organization will have things that they are stronger at and weaker at. So I think ultimately, understand where you are against it. And then look to, and I love a checklist, or I love anything that's kind of, an audit position. Do I know where I am? Have I audited? Am I comfortable? Where can I have the biggest impact? For the least effort, I suppose, is some of the, we're not blessed with lots and lots of spare time. So, within that framework, what are the most important, most impactful elements for you to look at? Because you might be sort of here and you want to get over there, but if you can
Mm.
get there, then let's do it incrementally. So I think that's not to get disheartened by reading a framework and thinking, well, that's just not this organization at all. But look at what are the small differences that you could make that might move you to the bigger impact areas of helping with regards to that. And then ultimately, I do sometimes I work for myself and with lots of different organizations, and I think sometimes some organizations are just not in the space to want to understand it, or to want to change, or to want to build this in. And either you find coping mechanisms with that, or I'll find another place to go, because it's incredibly frustrating if you can see what needs to be done, and you're trying to find lots of different ways to get the organizations to take that on board. But again, sometimes you get leadership that's just like, no, that's not what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And yeah, that you can't win everything, I suppose, is the way I sometimes look at it.
Yeah. Just sort of building on that a little bit, if there is there a common theme. So let's say there's a dozen organizations, everyone's going through an issue, reputation issue. Half of them get it right, half of them don't. The half that don't, is there a point at which you think, that's the point at which they made the mistake? That's the common mistake, the common theme. It's only going to go downhill from here. And we talk about Keir Starmer, don't we? We've got to talk about it again. You're looking at that and thinking, well, what they should have done is not asking you to talk for the Labour
No.
Party, but what's the common theme, the tipping point where you think, oh, this is going to be difficult now to get back from this?
Yeah, I mean it is and it's to be different for every organization, I suppose, in a bit like the level of risk, the nature of the incident. There's lots of what crisis comms academics would call like contextual modifiers. There's lots of things that will potentially change that, but I think a big part of it is the unwillingness to see and act on what you're being faced with.
Right.
So you try and either minimize it, it's not as bad as everybody thinks it is, or you try and brush it away and go, really? I didn't think anything happened, or you're not prepared to respond to it. So yeah, we know there's a problem, but we're going to carry on making it that way because it's not that bad. So you know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
those are a couple of key things, but there will be a lot of different modifiers that potentially would change how that looks at. One of the things I look at that kind of intrigues me, I suppose, and you mentioned you can buy my book on Amazon. You don't have to because I'm not a
Yeah.
massive Amazon fan, and I'm trying not to buy anything off Amazon because I don't really like buying off Amazon, and
You
I
can
don't
buy it
want to
from your
line.
website. You can
I
buy
don't
it
want
from
to
your
line.
website,
Yeah,
right?
Coke Page website, but I don't obviously want to line billionaires' pockets as well. But there is a thing of is there anything that Amazon could do that would stop people buying off Amazon?
Right.
And I think there probably is. You start to see some organizations that we think are untouchable. I mean, Tesla went through a nightmare, didn't they?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
there is, I think, even those big kind of particularly big tech companies, can they do anything that would stop us? I think, yeah, they probably can. And who knows, in another 5, 10 years, these untouchable companies who have
Mm.
sort of had this stranglehold, perhaps they will start to feel it. Because at the moment, I think there are a small group of very rich, very influential organizations, businesses like Amazon, like Google, like Meta, that almost can get away with a lot of bad behavior. I'm not,
Yeah.
and I have to tell senior people, I've had to tell them in the past, that doesn't mean just because, and I'll have to say the Donald Trump word, but just because he does that does not mean that you can behave in the same way because it's not going to work. And that's the same, I think, with some of those big organizations. At the minute, they feel untouchable. And so some businesses may think, well, that's what the way they deal with it. Tesla don't have a comms team. They just tell people. I think one of the things
Wow.
there's a book about Tesla
Wow.
that's called the Tesla Files. It's worth a read because it was from a whistleblower that was from in the German factory that they've got there. They once sent, I think, to a journalist who was asking questions about Tesla, a poop emoji. So, can we operate like that? And I do wonder whether some of that's going to come back and then not going to be able to operate in the way that they have done, perhaps going forward.
Yeah, well, you talked about case studies earlier. I think if one of those fell over from bad reputation, it'd make an interesting case study, and the rest of them would probably sit up and take note at that point. It'd be
Mm,
interesting to see whether that is
yeah,
ever the
definitely.
case. Um, I'm mindful of time. If anyone has got any questions they want to put into the chat, please do. We've got a few minutes left. But I suppose one of the questions, as we always get to an end of a conversation, again, I've really enjoyed it. There's so much. I think I could talk to you for hours. There's probably so much that you could talk about, and you talk about issues with great enthusiasm, things that go wrong with great enthusiasm as well, which I find
I
brilliant.
don't mean to.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
It's like, oh, there's a crisis. Brilliant. I can see that it really excites you, which is
I
great.
just, I am very, I'm going to say, I am very passionate about it. And I think I'm partly passionate about getting it better so that we,
Yeah.
we do it better. Particularly, and I was going to say one of the things that we've mentioned case studies, but there's also things like public inquiries, that bring a lot of information forward about how not to do things and how to do things better. And again, it's another thing we can use. And those will stretch across, if you think about kind of Grenfell, there's lots of organizations that were involved in that were mentioned in the public inquiry report. If anybody wants to know how not to do crisis comms and emergency comms, read the Uvalde school shooting, the Robb Elementary School shooting, if you remember that back in a couple of years, about 3 years ago now. And there's a whole chapter on public information with 46 recommendations because it was so badly
Wow.
done. So I think that's why I probably get passionate is that,
Yeah.
part of my drive is we have to do it better. And there's lots of things we can do. And as communicators, it's not us that have to do everything, and definitely not when you're in the reputation space or in the crisis management space. It's about us activating leadership and others to be aware of and act into
Yeah.
in the way that they need to.
I get that, and I think it's brilliant. that you feel that way. And I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I think it's been really interesting. Just in the absence of any other questions, just summarize, if you could, what I would call three takeaways. I know you know so much, we've talked about so much, but for those people listening, thinking, oh, I'm still not sure, where do I go with this? Where do I start? What actually there is a question there, but let's just carry on mine.
Okay.
Three things that
Three
someone,
takeaways.
yeah, three takeaways.
I think try and understand your reputation, as in who is important to the business, what are your different audiences, and where's the weighting, because they're obviously not all equal, and it doesn't matter what anybody says, you don't treat all of them equally, but to try and understand that as a starting point. Recognize whether you've got reputational challenges within the organization. So is some of the way it's governed, or the way it handles things, or the way decisions are made. So to kind of have a critical look at how it considers reputation or doesn't, in that sense. And then the kind of third thing for me is it's not all down to us. It's down to a lot of people. So what can we do to activate a change? Or and a small way, even if we can't do anything big. And I suppose can I have a fourth, which is buy me a book if you want to.
I say buy it, but not from Amazon. Buy it from your
From Amazon,
webpage or
from your local
Kogan,
bookshop.
yeah, or from Kogan Publishing or local bookshop. And actually, maybe as a takeaway, because people will learn a lot from your book, they'll learn a lot from today. If they're looking around at the world outside, what organisations do you think manage their reputation well, that they can go away and have a look at, perhaps in terms of
It's
what they
really
do?
interesting because Lego's a case study in there. So I put Lego
Right.
in because Lego, everybody loves Lego.
Yeah.
And despite issues in the past, Lego comes out on top. If anybody works for brands that do toys and kids things and what, they are always near the top because we have a nice kind of feeling towards them. So
Right.
Lego brings up nice feelings, doesn't it, around things? So yeah, have a look at that. Have a look at how they manage things on a day-to-day basis. Lego have been in the eye of it a bit. Because of the way the Iran war and how that's been used in propaganda, and they've sort of sailed through it in an interesting sort of way. So that's always one for me that's it's worth looking at that. And I also think look at the ones where it's bad, but they still do okay. So Ryanair feature as well in the book because people call it all sorts, but they own their space. Going back to we were talking about your values and your vision and what you're about, they just own that's what they're about, and they're unapologetically that's what they're about. So I think that's why they kind of get away with some of it. They are trying to change things, I know, a little bit, and there's some amendments they've been making to how they position themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's endlessly fascinating, I think, when you look at reputation reports that come out and how they rate things and rate different businesses.
Yeah, a couple of great examples there that I'm sure will resonate with many people listening as well. I'm sure we've all had experience with both of those. Amanda, we have covered so much today. It has been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I'm sure there'll be many people that will go away and read your book and buy your book and read it. As I say to people listening, I'm sure feel free to connect with Amanda on LinkedIn. I know she'll be happy to connect with you if you want to talk to her more about what she does and her knowledge and her books. I'm sure she'll be very happy to share that. As I say, feel free. We will be feel free to watch again on our website channel, on our YouTube channel, if you would like to go through some of this stuff again, because I know we've covered a lot very quickly. But Amanda, thank you to you. Thank you to everyone
Thank you.
that's listened. I'm sure everyone's going to take something away from it. I know I will today. And I wish everyone a good rest of the day and a good week. Hopefully, we'll see you again at our next Meet the Author series. And hopefully, you'll be listening in too to the next author as well, Amanda. But
Absolutely.
indeed. Well, thanks again, everyone. And we'll see you soon. Many thanks.